welcome. Have a quick prayer and pick up where we get off last week. Lord, we thank you for the time together. For fruitful that are times that are good. So last week I in the class last week to introduce the second coming. That's the class. Introduce the second coming as next event on a timeline that we're going to talk about. And I'll cover some erroneous views, the wrong view that we go on board. And we'll just go over those real quickly. The post-millennial view, post-millennial view has the Lord returning, the second coming, and the end of the kingdom. End of the kingdom. And according to their view, the Lord does not come to rule and reign. Apparently, the main interest when he returns is to be judged. So post-millennialism sees that the Lord returns after the kingdom. That's wrong. The amillennial view, amil and on board, believes that we are currently in the kingdom, and the kingdom is a spiritual kingdom. Christ is in heaven at the right hand of God, ruling and reigning over the hearts of the believers, or through the believer, or some sense like that. But the kingdom is not an earthly kingdom at all. And so in the amil view, the second coming also comes at the end of the kingdom. Now, post-mill and amil are different in a lot of areas. But one area in which they're similar is they both put the second coming at the end of the kingdom. And another area in which they are similar is the amil view also believes that Christ returns to judge. So Christ returns to judge. The same in the post-mill and the amil position. Preterism up there is a way of looking at the book of Revelation. There's several ways to look at the book of Revelation. One way is called the idealist way, which basically ultimately forgotten at the end. That's all that matters. Another view is called the historicist view. That view sees Revelation as a bunch of cycles in history that just repeat over and over. All from there's the futurist view. That's our view, that Revelation is future. All that or on future. And the preterist view takes most of Revelation as having already happened. Some way, shape, or form. And the only thing left to happen, that remains to happen, is the second coming. And so that's the preterist. read much in the area of eschatology, and you read outside of what we might consider the full sympathetic with our view, we're not running this group. Our view is the premillennial view. The premillennial view says that the Lord returns before the kingdom, pre-millennial kingdom. So Christ is going to return before the kingdom. He returns as king to set up the kingdom. By returning to set up the kingdom, not returning just to judge. Now, we're going to look at a few things here, such as a general description of the second coming, and then a particular description is given in Revelation 18. Before I do that, I want to mention something about the prophecies in the Old Testament of the Messiah's coming. So one that should be, I think, is very familiar to us is Isaiah chapter 9. Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 and 7. And because that's so familiar to us, I want to use that as sort of illustration passage to look at. So you have Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 and 7 open there in the Bible. I'll read it. I start reading. Tell me what this is the future. Okay, when I start reading about the future, raise your hand or yell or scream or do something. Okay. So Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder. His name. Okay, yeah. It doesn't take very long, and we go from, at least in our perspective, going from history to future. Okay, so now just let me read the whole thing here. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder. His name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end. On the throne of David, over his kingdom, order it and establish it, judgment and justice, from that time forward and even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will form them. So, to us, this prophecy is provided. Yes. I think as far as the fulfillment, it has to be future. This isn't just talking about what is true, but what will be accomplished. So quickly we divide this passage up into, well, this is a prophecy about the first coming, prophecy about the second coming. Let me ask you a question. How do you think Isaiah, people he was writing to, would have understood this prophecy? Would they have understood it? First coming and second coming? No. They would have understood it as one old, harmonious prophecy. So how can that be? Could this prophecy, this is one prophecy, how could this prophecy have been fulfilled? the way it was written. Couldn't this prophecy have been fulfilled the way it was written? Okay, if the Jews would have accepted Christ, this prophecy would have been fulfilled exactly how it was written. So it's only when Christ is rejected that we then can see, well, one part has been fulfilled, but the second part has yet to be fulfilled. So this is one prophecy. This is one prophecy. And this one prophecy has a partial fulfillment and a yet to be fulfilled aspect. So, of course, Christ has come. Unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. And so that speaks of his coming into the world. But it's the second part of chapter, verse 6 through 7, that speaks of the role that he has, that Isaiah is prophesying about. And so I just want you to keep in mind, when we look at these prophecies in the Old Testament, and we see in a prophecy, we say, well, this has got to be about the first coming, and this is about the second coming. That's not how the prophet looked at it. That's not how the original readers would have looked at it. They would look at it as, this is one prediction, and this is how Messiah is supposed to come. This all pertains to the coming of this one person. So we need to be careful that as we look at those Old Testament prophecies, we don't read the New Testament or what we know back into those Old Testament prophecies. Try to understand. I'll read it back, understanding of what it says, where it says it, in its historical context. Okay? So that's just a encouragement. Make sure you read the Bible correctly. Now let me give you a general description of the second coming. So turn to Matthew 24. Matthew 24, verses 29 to 30. I'm going to be skipping around here a lot. So Matthew 24, verses 29 and 30. Says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming in on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Okay, so I want to particularly note on this first reading of this passage that it says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, particularly with reference to the second half of the 7-year tribulation. That is when the Son of Man comes. Okay, the Son of Man comes between the tribulation and the kingdom. And so the second coming is a pre-millennial coming. The second coming is Christ returning before the kingdom is established. So it follows the tribulation. Now turn to Daniel chapter 7, verse 30. Daniel chapter 7, verse 13. This is verses 13 and 14. Daniel chapter 7. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man. That's the name title. One like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him before him. And to him, notice what it says, then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away. His kingdom, one which shall not be destroyed. Now, you have to keep in mind when this kingdom is going to be in the broad scope of history. So, in Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7, we have Daniel's visions that figure, that present the kingdoms of the Gentiles. So in Daniel chapter 2, we have an image, right? We have that image. And you have a head of what? Gold. And what does that golden head represent? It represents a person and a kingdom. Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. Then you have an upper torso of silver. What's that upper torso of silver represent? The needs of the Persians. Then you have a lower torso. A lower torso. What's that represent? And that's bronze. Right? Greece. And then you have legs of iron. What's that? It's wrong. Okay. So you have these Gentile empires. And it's after those Gentile empires, after they come, after they're established, after they rule, that the Son of Man receives his kingdom. So, could Jesus have come and ruled from what we know of history now? Could his kingdom have been established in heaven when he first came to earth? No. If Jesus did not come to earth and didn't have his kingdom established in heaven. So the description in chapter 7, where it says, the Son of Man coming with clouds came to the Ancient Days, then to him was given a dominion and kingdom. That dominion and kingdom could not be given to him, at his birth. Could not. Why? What Gentile kingdom? Rome. Rome ruled the earth. When did Rome stop ruling? No. 70 AD. Huh? I have no idea. About 410. 410. So it's the Roman Empire for the last couple hundred more years after, right? And going a lot there after, right? So this giving of the kingdom could not have happened when Jesus first came, not connected to his birth, not connected to his birth, connected to an event that comes after the Gentile kingdom. Secondly, I want you to notice here in Daniel that he doesn't have the kingdom until the kingdom is given to him. Then to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom. Now, according to the very next phrasing, why couldn't this dominion, glory, and kingdom just be some heavenly kingdom? Well, it says that all peoples, nations, languages should serve him. Right? Should serve him. So, all, not just people in heaven, all people. But this can't just be talking about heavenly kingdoms. Now we talk about earthly kingdoms. And this earthly kingdom is an everlasting dominion that won't pass away. It won't pass away. And it won't be short. So this is what it's all. So this is all pointing to the fact that this is a premillennial kingdom. Secondly, if you go back to Matthew 24, I just get some. So if you go back to Matthew 24, verse 30, I want you to notice something else about this thing. Second coming is not pre-millennial. It's on the way. There's a lot of other scripture that we can look at to show that the second coming is pre-millennial. A lot of them don't have to go through every single passage scripture that indicates that. So those are just two representative. Matthew 24 gave the representative passage. But notice what it says again in Matthew 24:30. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn. Notice especially what it says here. And they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power. We're going to see it. That tells us that the second coming is visible. It's a visible coming. They will see the Son of Man, Lord Jesus Christ, coming when he returns to the earth. It's a visible coming. If you look over to Acts chapter 1, you see this is confirmed or affirmed here in this passage, Acts chapter 1, verse 11. Let me just pick up at verse 9. Now, when he had spoken these things while they watched, he was taken up. Thou received out of their sight. And while they looked steadfastly toward heaven as he went up, behold, two men stood by them in white apparel, who also said, "The Galilee, why do you stand gazing up to the heaven? This Jesus, who was taken up from you into heaven, will so come in like manner as you saw him go into heaven." So they were watching him as he was taken up and disappeared into the clouds. And when it says he's going to come back the same way, it's to be understood that he comes back out of the clouds, and that's coming from heaven, out of the clouds, and we'll be seen. We'll be seen. So it's visible. Visible. The second coming is visible. It's premillennial, and it's visible. The third thing I want you to note about the general description of the second coming is also found here in Acts chapter 1, verse 11. So when these two men are talking with the disciples here as Jesus is ascending, and they say that Jesus is going to come back in like manner as you saw him go, does that mean he's going to come back out of heaven, but he's not going to be physical anymore, he's going to be spiritual? Let me ask this. Was Christ resurrected physically? Yeah. And we know that because resurrection is not spiritual work. Resurrection is all about physical. Okay? Spirits aren't resurrected. Bodies are resurrected. The resurrection is a physical work. When Christ ascended, did he just ascend spiritually? Was it just the Spirit of Christ that ascended? No. That would have left his body on the earth. By the way, what do we call it? The Spirit separated from the body. Death. So, that can't be. Right? So that tells us that the ascension was a physical ascension. So, the expectation of the return of Christ is that it will also be physical. He's going to return bodily. Now, turn back with me to Zechariah chapter 14. Still on this point of the physical, bodily second coming. Zechariah chapter 14. Didn't have to go too far. Zechariah's almost left. We'll have to do a part of it there. Now notice what it says in verse 4. Okay, this is talking about Messiah coming. It says, then the Lord, this is verse 3, then the Lord will go forth and fight against the nations as he fights in the day of battle. And in that day, so on the same day that he was going to fight, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. So is that the Mount of Olives in Vermont? No, there is a Mount of Olives. But that's not it, because it says here, which faces Jerusalem on the east. Now, is that a physical description? A physical, geographical description? Absolutely. Then it says, and the Mount of Olives shall split in two from east to west and make a very large valley. Half the mountain shall go towards the north, half the mountain shall go towards the south. Now, what would we call that description? Spiritual or physical? Physical. And so it says in verse 4, his feet will stand on the mountain. If this wasn't meant to be physical, and his feet actually touched the Mount of Olives, it could just say he came to the Mount of Olives. But the fact that the scripture describes his feet touching the Mount of Olives tells us this is a physical second coming. Become bodily. So there's other scriptures that talk about the physical nature, the earthly nature of the second coming. There's nothing in the Bible that would suggest to us that the second coming, as far as the physical coming, isn't exactly like the first coming. But remember, those Old Testament prophecies, they didn't tell the difference. They just saw it as one coming. There'll be a physical coming. So when we get to the New Testament, and in the New Testament, it's revealed that the Lord's going to first go back to the Father before he comes again. We would expect he's going to come the same way that the prophecy said he's going to come. That's the third thing. So the second coming is premillennial, it's visible, and it's physical. Right? It's going to come physically. By the way, that's where the amillennialists have a huge problem. The amillennialists do not like the idea of this physical aspect of the future. They just greeting it. They resist it. Because the history of that view, they have equated the physical with wickedness. Because remember, the word carnal, you hear the word carnal. That's not what the word carnal means, though. What's the word carnal? Flesh. Flesh. In carnation. Human flesh. So carnity, Latin flesh. Carnal flesh. It doesn't have the idea of sin. But the amillennialists, they take it as flesh, physical, earthly, somehow less than spiritual or the heaven. That makes sense. A lot of these folks think it's dispensationalism because it's not dispensation history, where a guy like C.F. Schofield would say there's a heavenly people of God and an earthly people of God, which I wouldn't agree with that. But that's right in line with the non-millennialism reaction. That's it. So there's one more, actually three more points I want us to look at here. And the next one is that the second coming is triumphal, or a conquering coming. So we're in Zechariah, right? So look at verse 3. Look at verse 3. Zechariah chapter 14, verse 3. Then the Lord shall go forth and fight against those nations as he fights in the day of battle. So he's going to fight. Coming to conquer. Coming in triumph. Turn back a few pages, again to Daniel chapter 7. Let's chapter, we got 12. Daniel chapter 7. Pages back in the Bible. Daniel chapter 7, verse 14. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, so that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. Should serve him. Because he's going to be the conqueror. He's the one who's going to be triumphant. Turn or just look at verse 27. Verse 27. Chapter 7, verse 27. Then the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. That's not going to do. His kingdom, not a man. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Triumphal, conquering. Okay, now turn to Matthew 24 again. Matthew 24. I'm going to wear this spot out in the Bible. Matthew 24, verse 30, look at the end. And they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. Look at the last 5 words. With power and great glory. That's a triumphal, conquering coming. Okay, now turn towards the end of your New Testament, the book of Jude. Jude, verse 14. Jude, verse 14 and 15. Now Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about these men also, saying, Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his saints, to execute judgment on all, to convict all who are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds which they have committed in an ungodly way, and all the harsh things which the ungodly sinners have spoken against him. So he's coming, and he's going to conquer. Coming, and he's going to conquer. One more, Revelation 19, verse 15. In this verse is showing this triumphal coming, this conquering coming. Chapter 19, verse 15, I'm starting. Now out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, that with it he should strike the nation, and he himself will rule them with a rod of iron. He himself treads the winepress of the fierceness of the wrath of Almighty God. Verse 16. He has on his robe and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Verse 20. Verse 20. Then the beast was captured, with him the false prophet. Verse 21. And the rest were killed with the sword. Paul talked about second coming, and he comes as a triumphal conqueror. Comes as a conquering king at the second coming. Now, let's go return back. Matthew 24. Okay, go back to Matthew 24. We just put your finger here, but something there. We'll do that. Matthew 24, but we're not going to verse 30. Okay. On verse 36. Okay, there's something else we need to know about this. The day and the hour, only know about the Father. But of that day and that hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. Okay, the Father knows the day and the hour. Now, I think that means he might be able to make a pretty good guess. Let's see here. And getting at least paid by those dollars, live through the tribulation. They're going to know. They're going to know the year that the war. Right? Tribulation is how long? So you don't even have to be smart to figure that out. You just got to count. You'll know when it starts. If that's not enough, you'll know what the middle is. Okay. And so you know how many months from the middle, how many days from the second counting. So, preceded by certain signs. We've already talked about this when we look at chapter 24. But we're not going to look at the whole chapter again. But there's all these things that happen in the tribulation. Guess what they are? Signs that the second coming is about to happen. They're all pointing to the end of the tribulation and the second coming. So, general description of the second coming. It's premillennial, meaning Christ comes back before the kingdom. It's visible, it's bodily, he comes in triumph, he comes conquering. He's going to come at a day and an hour that is known by the Father. It's not known by angels or men. And it will be preceded by certain signs. Okay, so that's general description. Now, let's look at a particular description. This is in Revelation chapter 19, verses 11 through 21. So, Revelation 19. Verses 11 through 21. So, verse 11. Now I saw heaven open. What's that tell us about the second coming? Where does it begin? In heaven. It begins in heaven. Continue reading in verse 11. And behold, a white horse, and he who sat on him was called Faithful and True. In righteousness he judges and makes war. So the second coming is going to involve a man on a white horse. That's what we can tell from that verse. It's going to involve a man on a white horse. Now, what's that man called? Faithful and true. So he's faithful and true. What he says, what he does, finds the truth, and he does it faithfully. Now, what's his activities when he does this? Judges and makes war, and how does he do those two things? In righteousness. In righteousness. So it's not going to be, well, I got most of it right. You know, I did most of the stuff. It's righteous. Everything he does will be in righteousness. So this is all done by this man on this white horse. Verse 12, we're getting something in the description of this man. It says, his eyes were like a flame of fire. On his head were many crowns. So his eyes were like a flame. How would we take that? His eyes were bright. Something like that. They were like a flame of fire. Not they were a flame of fire. They were like a flame of fire. And on his head were many crowns. Keep reading here. He had a name written that no one knew except himself. So he's a little bit of a man of mystery. A little mystery involved. He had a name written that no one knew except himself. Verse 13, we see the clothing of this man. That he was clothed, the robe dipped in blood. And then we see a particular name of the man. And the name is called the Word of God. That should immediately draw your attention back to what Cass's gospel. On chapter 1, the beginning was the Word. So we know the name of the man. And in verse 14, we see the armies of this man. It says, and the armies in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, followed him on white horses. So they're coming from heaven. And who exactly makes up these armies? We don't know from this passage. This army. Could this be believers who are in heaven? The angels, probably most likely angels, because heavenly host, that army, that angels, could be that, but we're not told exactly. And it says they're clothed in fine, white, clean linen. So they're dressed much like this man, and they died white person, the wrong way. In verse 15 now, verse 15, we see the activity of the man. It says, now out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, that with it he should strike the nations. So here's conflict, combat. He's going to strike the nations. He's going to conquer the nations. And he himself will rule them around about. By the way, word rule here, word interesting because in the Old Testament, where this comes from, I can't remember off the top of my head where it comes from, but the Old Testament, where that phrase comes from, Psalm 2. Psalm 2. It's the word to break. Here, he will rule them, he will shepherd them with a rod of iron. Doesn't that make sense? Okay. Psalm 23. Thy rod and staff comfort. This isn't talking about people who are on the face down. It's right. The rod, the word rule, the shepherd, and he's coming and his people. And then it goes on to say, he himself treads the winepress of the fierceness of the wrath of Almighty God. So he's bringing the wrath of Almighty God. So that's his activity. We see the official title of this man in verse 16. It says, and on his robe and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings, Lord of Lords. He's the king of all the kings. He's the Lord of all the Lords. He's preeminent. So that's his official title. We see in verses 17 through 18, there's a precursor to the battle he's going to fight. Precursor to the battle he's going to fight. Verse 17, and I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the birds that fly in the midst of heaven. Looking, it says, come and gather together for the supper of the great God. He may eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captives, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses and of those who sit on them, and the flesh of all people, free and slave, the small and great. Now, whatever way people think that, the one way that you have to take it is that the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, all these people are dead. Are dead. And then in verses 19 through 21, we have that. Here's that. It says in verse 19, and I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their army gathered together to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army. Then the beast was captured. That just kind of fast forward there, doesn't it? Seems like there's a lot that happens between verses 19 and 20. Verse 19 just says, here's the beast, here's the kings of the earth, they're all gathered together, fighting against King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And then it just goes, verse 20, it says, then the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet who worked signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his image. These two were cast alive into the lake of fire burning with brimstone. And the rest, kings of the earth, their armies, allied themselves to the Antichrist. The rest were filled with the sword which proceeded from the mouth of him who sat on the horse, and all the birds were filled with their flesh. So that's a pretty detailed description of what happened at the second coming. Here from Revelation chapter 19. Three other things, just real quickly to note about the second coming. So the timing of the second coming is after the tribulation, before the kingdom. After the tribulation, before the kingdom. What we call pre-millennial. After the tribulation, before the millennial kingdom. Pre-millennial coming. The location of the second coming is where? We've already read that. Mount of Olives, outside of Jerusalem. And Israel. The significance of the second coming is, let's give that a little bit more thought. What's the significance of the second coming? Why is it significant? Okay? And then, why does he have to go close? Old Testament prophets, God said he would, right? God said, I'm sending the Messiah, and he's going to be king. So he's got to come rule as king. So that means at the second coming, Christ is fulfilling all those prophecies that were still yet to be fulfilled about the coming of the Messiah. So when Christ comes again, he'll be fulfilling Isaiah chapter 6, chapter 9, verse 6b through verse 7. He'll be fulfilling that. Another significance of the second coming is that the second coming, this will be a fulfillment of God's covenant promises to the Jews. Now, God has made them certain promises. He's made covenant with them. And it's with the second coming that we see the fulfillment of those things taking place. Remember, we got those four covenants. And the covenant, Palestinian or the Promised Land covenant, the land covenant, the Davidic covenant, and the new covenant. And they're given in that order, right? They're given in that order. I think they're fulfilled in reverse order. And the new covenant is fulfilled first. Because the nation of Israel has to have a change or transition of heart. So it's got to happen first. And then you have the Davidic covenant being fulfilled. Because Christ is coming as the Davidic king. So David's dynasty. And they will be in the light. That Abraham's covenant will be fulfilled. So it fulfills God's covenant promises to the Jews. We also see with the second coming that it fulfills God's plan and design for man. Remember, you can remember that this far. Genesis chapter 1. What's God's plan and design for man? Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, do to have dominion over the earth. That's his plan and design for man as God's ruler over the earth. So when the Messiah comes again, that's what he does. He fulfills that. And finally, this fulfills God's plan for salvation. Second coming fulfills the plan for salvation. And that's not only will resurrect the Lord who's being 500 people. Any questions? Right. Well, most people who claim to be Christian, and never using that wrong, most people who claim to be Christian are going to fall right there. They're going to be So, historically speaking, so if we just view this from history's point of view, first view was premillennial. And this was the view of the early church. But this is the early church, the church for the first 2.5 centuries or so that was in existence. Those are the premillennial view. The second view that comes along is the amillennial view. That's the second view that comes along. And it comes out of a view of spiritualizing, allegorizing interpretation of the Bible. That's where it comes from. Okay. So all those passages in the Old Testament that are premillennial, we spiritualize them and we allegorize them, all of a sudden we become humble. Right? Then the third view to come along much, much later. Is post-millennial. Today, the post-millennial view is going to be held by pretty. So they're all going to be reformed. And they're going to be highly committed in that direction. Highly committed. And the post-millennial view today is probably most characterized by these Reformed churches that are heavily involved in their communities, and social aspect, governmental aspect of their community, because they're acting like we need to be involved. They don't establish the kingdom now. That war back there. That's pretty much how. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Just let me conclude with this. There's some people who would hold to our view of the second coming and the rapture. So our view is premillennial, pre-tribulationalist. We believe that the Lord returns kingdom. We believe that the church will be raptured for the tribulation. There's some people who hold that view, same view as us, who view the rapture of the church. The Lord comes to rapture the church when the Lord comes again to the earth. They view that as two phases of one event. They just say, well, this is all the Lord's coming, and there's two phases to it. First, comes in the air to rapture the church, and secondly, he comes to the earth to establish the kingdom. And I don't really agree with that because it mixes two distinct things. It mixes what God is doing for the church and what God is doing for the nation. But it mixes those two things up. Now, I don't think I did just like it with that. Maybe it hasn't really happened yet. You know, hasn't really come to that point yet. But I think talking about two different things. I would say two totally distinct things. That deal with two totally. The second coming is Jewish centric. I can put that. It's centered on Israel. It's even more Jewish centric than the first coming. And the first coming was about offering the kingdom to the Jews and providing salvation to the world. The second coming is about establishing a kingdom for the Jews, then ruling over the world. So I think it's much more Jewish than what we call it. And so next time we're going to get into eternal state. Okay. Yeah, that's going to be the last thing. So that means that the first week of January, this New Year's Day, other January, Wednesday. So in grade 3, so I would not even mention that. Yeah. Just listen to this stand. Oh. I don't know why. I want that. Or birthday. And so I had a conversation about it. Okay, stay tuned. Let me pray and we'll be dismissed. Lord, we give you thanks for this time we've had together. Thank you for know that you're coming again. You're coming before the kingdom. You're coming to set up the kingdom. You're coming physically. Will be physically on the earth and become triumph. So, Father, we look forward to that time where many of the things that we see as wrong and wicked in our world to now, at this time, we look forward to the time when these things will be corrected, not tolerated. Lord Jesus Christ will rule.